Hello everyone, it's been a while since I last made a video, right? So there is no reason in particular for this one, I just felt like talking about my recent ADV rankings. There is no script or anything, so hopefully I'm not gonna look up for my words too much. But anyway, I wanted to talk about my latest rankings for the second part of 2023. And I'm just gonna go right into it. So these rankings are highly subjective. I try to find the right mix between putting the good ones like at the top, obviously, but also reflecting my preference when it comes to picking teams for tournament games. I haven't lettered too much in the recent months, mostly been playing tournaments. Which one exactly? I'm thinking played in the Kalos Invitational, I played in the ADV Major, ADV Cup. There is probably something else, the Gym Cool Invitational, even though for this one I haven't really played in the latest stage of the tournament, only pools. But yeah, I wanted this VR to reflect my own vision of the tier. At first glance, there isn't like too much shocking choices, but I will try to explain the few that like look a bit weird, such as the high Magneton, the high Dug, maybe the low Mance for some of you. Yeah, so I'm just gonna start talking about everything, and hopefully it's gonna be nice for some of you. I remember reading a comment recently about someone saying he used to love listening to the past rankings while he was like in bed and falling asleep to it. So yeah. So I divided the Pokemon in each rank like it's pretty much the usual. I'm gonna start with the S ranks. These 4 Pokemons are pretty much what I always go for in one way or another. First is Skarmory, so not Tyranitar this time. It's not like I think like Skarmory is much better than the other one. In fact, that's why they are both in S rank. But I put Skarmory first because something I wanted to reflect in this VR too is like how I think when I team build, and Skarmory is by far the Pokemon that like that I think about the most when I'm gonna put Pokemon in my team. I really do not want to be weak to Spice Longem, or I do not want to struggle into Skarmory early. If I have Pokemon that can kill Skarmory, I need a solid switch or a solid play around it. I also think struggling against Skarmory is the single biggest weakness of any team in ADV, so you always need a very concrete plan around it. For anyone who watches my game, you will notice that I'm quite high on Magneton plus Spinner or Spinner in general, and that's solely because of Skarmory as well. Whenever I use sets, I often like having a move that hits Skarmory for reasonable damage. For example, I'm a fan of like any water cover rage on Perch. I will very rarely use the EQ Ice Beam plus 1, and 1 not being Surf Hydro Pump, once again, because I don't want to give Skarmory any leeway. Another way that impacts my team building, is I'm quite high on Thief Skarmory myself, because I do like using defensive archetypes. Defensive archetypes also give Skarmory the most leeway, and Thief is a good way to remove Skarmory leftovers and stop it from healing the whole game and like applying pressure on you. So yeah, that's not like there is not a new way. There are no new tools in Skarmory's game recently that made me change my mind. I just think the way it impacts team building for me make me put it first. Also, in general, I really think that whenever I use teams that I consider consistent, Spikes will be my go-to, and Skarmory is the best spiker bar none. So yeah, that's why it's first. I do keep track of my usage stats, and like my most used Pokemon this year is a combo of Skarmory, T-Tar, Zapdos. It's actually Zapdos, and that's why it's S rank. I will explain in a bit why. But yeah, like my go-to in terms of consistency are Zapdos, Skarmory, T-Tar. Anyway, second is Titor. Maybe sometimes, by the way, while I talk about a Pokemon, I'll go back to one I already talked about earlier. If something comes up to mind, we'll see about that. So second is Titor. Titor is Sand. Sand is not replicated by anything else in the tier. It's very good. Nothing much to talk about. What I like the most about Titor is its defensive applications on top of offensive process. Nothing new there, but I really like if I slap Titor on a team, I feel like I have a good switch early to many Pokemons, so I can shield my late gamers or my defensive roles. Like let's say I'm gonna face Jirachi, I don't have to send Blissey, which is easily abusable, and I can send Titor instead. You know, that's the kind of stuff Titor is good about. Besides that, it's just good old Titor. I think Sand is like also what makes team consistent in general, Spikes and Sand, so especially if you try to go for high ranks on the ladder, you will look at Titor and Skarm, or at least the Spiker the most. In tournament games, it's more forgivable to not use Titor. I will also mention that Sand is like one of the best way to keep pretty much the whole tier in check. And while in tournament, it's very easy to take risk, like, oh, you know, I can afford being weak to, I don't know, bad on pass variants or Snorlax, because those are not the most popular choices. If you want to ladder to the top, your team will need to be better against them than a given tournament team. And Titor is, like Sand is honestly I think the best limiter to this strategy. Another one that I will talk about later in more detail is like Ninjask. So one of the best way to limit Ninjask is actually to prevent it from healing with leftovers, and Sand is gonna be really good for that, which is why Titor is just a really good Pokemon. Whenever I use Titor myself nowadays, it's still Pursuit and Dragon Dance sets with a few BKC Tar sprinkling. I'm not really big on Mixtar, Subtar, stuff like that, like the Wall Breaker kinds. I don't think they are that good. DD is always a threat. I actually like DD early more than late game, because it's a really good opener. And if you face some teams that don't rely on a good bulky water, so like no Swampert, and they go for Claydol Jirachi as physical wall, which is Sundet unaired off, Titor is really gonna put a dent into those. DD on like early Zapdos or early Spikes is also a good way to dent the team again. Nothing new in this regard. I should check in my teams, but yeah, I don't think I really made use of new ways to use Titor recently. In general, I haven't really like explored the tier too much. I've just been using good teams and with distinct preference that I will highlight later, but so far none of them applies. So third is Zapdos, might be quite high. I believe among the VR submissions I got so far, I am the highest Zapdos. I will try to explain why. So I just think it's really good. I think it can 1v1 the whole tier pretty much. I know some people think it's not that amazing, especially offensive players, because in their eyes, they think they can just 1v1 Zapdos with whatever they are using, and it's not gonna be a huge problem. And that's true to an extent, but the way I see it is that Zapdos has a pretty positive matchup against all the defensive players in the tier. So while offensive players don't fear it too much, people who will use balance will often have to switch out of Zapdos with their Skarmory or the Swampert or even the Claydol, because while Claydol resists T-Bolt, you are not returning much in return. And Zapdos is gonna be really good at abusing that and passing to Wall Breaker safely, or even sub-passing in some cases. Sub-pass also really benefits from the downhill Titor usage, because healing with leftovers is really big for repeated sub-pass use, especially when there are many Pokemon you can sub-pass on. Besides that, I feel like whenever I put Zapdos on a team, I have a somewhat of a semi-check against like pretty much everything. So it just feels very solid to use in general. I also think Superman archetypes are really consistent and pretty good against the whole field when you don't know what you're gonna face. So if you want something consistent, bringing Superman is good, and Zapdos, like Speed F Zapdos, is legit what makes Superman work. So yep, that's why I think it's quite good on top of like all of its offensive applications. Then I also think it fits very nicely in like semi-pass archetype, you know, the kind of stuff with Celebi, because it's gonna have a really good defensive typing while also keeping the chain going with Battle Pass itself. And it's gonna make use of the CM if you wanna use CM Celebi. So yeah, I'm thinking if there is something else I'm not mentioning about Zapdos, but I just think that's mostly it, honestly. Like if you look at the most of the VR, it's gonna be great against Skarmory, it's gonna be pretty good against Metagross 1v1. It's obviously good against Swampert. Against Celebi, Celebi needs to have Psychic to treat on it. And you can use like Protect HPI's Toxic is a fucking menace, and like nothing really likes dealing with it. So, and it's been used quite a bit by some people, notably H-Clat, who got who was the first to reach 1900 on the ladder recently with this set, I believe. Just really fucking good. Let me think if there's something else I'm not mentioning about Zapdos, but that's actually mostly it. Then there is Metagross. So the way I see it when I build in ADV is that I'm usually gonna go for a consistent approach featuring Titar and or Skarmory, if not at least a Spiker. And if I'm not using that, I'm mostly gonna have Metagross, because if I'm not using that, I'm probably using an offense. And if I use an offense, I will very often have Metagross, because, like, especially if I don't use Titar, just really good at breaking stuff early. It picks whatever it wants with Boom. You can tailor the morph set however you want. Very just solid defensive profile as well, tanking a ton of stuff on the physical side, coming on multiple special Pokemon and threatening them, like even Celebi, Jirachi. Well, I mean, Metagross isn't that good of a switch against them, but you can actually come in and threaten them, depending on the set. I also think Agility Metagross is like the bane of offense. I've talked about it before, but I will just repeat it because this hasn't changed to me. I also think Clear Body is one of the best ability to have on a physical attacker in ADV, considering Salamance's popularity and the way people build. It just like, whenever I use stuff personally, I like to think of a checkmating way. So if I use a physical cleaner, I really do not want my opponent to play around me with Salamence. So for example, that's why I'm not a big fan of like late game DDTR, because even if technically you will beat Salamence Metagross with good prediction, your opponent still have some leeway by pivoting between Rock Slide, Earthquake, and factoring in Intimidate. But Metagross completely prevents that with Clear Body, and I think that's amazing. I also think like it's a really good Battle Pass recipient as a result. Like with SD Pass, if you SD Pass to Agility Growth, your opponent just can't do shit. That shit just wins. Yeah, we've seen like people like Frudazi going on insane ladder runs, and a lot of the time he was using Spike Sand with Agility Growth in the back, good defensive profile, good late game profile as well, and nothing you can do around it. Nowadays, whenever I use Metagross, I tend to pretty much always go with Rock Slide in the moveset, because I really hate the Zapdos and Moltres being able to check you in a pinch. And even early game, I like Rock Slide Metagross for this reason. So yeah. It's S rank because it's just extremely consistent. Even in defensive teams, Metagross has a really good profile over like Swampert and Metagross. Over other rock resist like Swampert, Claydol, and Jirachi for its ability to better check Pokemon like Suicune, thanks to not being weak to Surf and also having access to Explosion. That's pretty much it. Yeah, can't think of anything else to say about Metagross right now. Then we are moving to the A rank. So these Pokemon are extremely good as well to me. They are my most popular choices when I build. I just think the top like the 4 Pokemon I put in S, I use them more than whatever is in A. And I just think they have a really good offensive-defensive ratio where I put them in pretty much every team, at least one of multiple of them. In A rank, usually I will... Well, I mean, it's hard to explicitly decide why you put divide between 2 ranks. But I feel like the profile in A can be interchanged with other Pokemon better, and the profile in S are more unique, I guess. Like, there is no Pokemon that Battle Pass like Zapdos. There is no Pokemon that like boom as well as Metagross. Nothing else brings sand, nothing else spikes as well as Skarmory. Anyway, I'm gonna go over the A rank. So put Swampert first, because you can never go wrong with Swampert. Like, the way I see ADV, honestly, Zapdos, Swampert, you just never ever go wrong with them. Obviously, I think that Swampert is slightly more abusable, because it's Skarmory bait. I mean, you can say the same about Metagross, to be fair, but Metagross return boom at least, and have more of a direct offensive presence, even though Mixed Bird is still a threat. It's one of the Pokemon I keep in mind the most, especially when I go to Superman builds. But yeah, Swampert does it all, honestly. It fits offense and defense alike. It's the only defensive Pokemon I feel strong against when I wanna have something that is gonna check all of, like, Physical Mance, Physical Titor, Metagross, all in one. In this current metagame where Agility Metagross is around, I also think physically defensive Swampert, but Swampert in general, but especially like bulky Swampert, is the only Pokemon that make me feel somewhat safe against it, because every other Pokemon is either a water that's gonna take sand damage, or is not gonna have the resist to all of mash, and well, is gonna have a resist to mash and not take a shitter from Earthquake. So like, if you use Claydol, Jirachi or Flygon as your Metagross check, yes, they're resistant, but they do not take on mash or Earthquake too well. And every Flyers don't really work nowadays because Agility Rock Slide is a thing. And Swampert is the only thing that makes me feel somewhat safe against meta. So yeah, big fan. Mostly defensive set. Not too. I recon offensive Pert is good, but I'm not a big fan myself. What I also like about Pert though is that whenever I use offense and put Pert in my team, I can still use a bulky set, but fit in a move that's gonna target something that is annoying for the team. So to give a concrete example, because that's pretty vague, I'm gonna put Swampert on a CM pass. It's gonna be good. It's gonna make me feel safe against, well, safer at least, against typical CM pass antagonist like Aerodactyl and Mance. But Swampert can still make use of the CM pass itself with Surf, and also bring like Blissey and Focus Punch it. And yeah, that like just Swampert always has one move you can tinker with. Extremely flexible Pokemon. Anyway, going next over Celebi. So Celebi is quite high compared to the past. I still think Celebi has like a ton of flaws. Mostly, you know, taking spikes, allowing Skarmory to spike early, and it's also like an invite to flying Pokemon in general. Those, which is an annoying weakness to have because those don't take spikes cheap, will often reverse the momentum against you, like Salamence, Aerodactyl especially. But I still put Celebi very high, and it's only because of the Battle Pass sets. And that's because the way I see team building in ADV, whenever I'm gonna bring team myself or build something, I'm really gonna often have Battle Pass in mind, because I think a lot of teams are underprepared against it. And unless you have Aerodactyl, to be fair, like Aerodactyl is the only hard stop to CM chains. Everything else you can often tailor the Celebi sets around it, and they have such a high reward whenever it works. and often it's not that hard to make a somewhat consistent team around them. That I like it, because when I build in ADV, I'm not always trying to have a 50-50 matchup. I always try to find an edge somewhere. And Celebi is really good at finding an edge and like finding a hole and digging deep into it. Because if you misplay once against CM Pass or SD Pass, or if your team is not prepared against it, there is like little you can do, honestly. And while it's also true for the user of Celebi, because obviously if it doesn't work for you, your team is gonna be worse than the average team with struggling. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it does. But I don't really mind that, because I trust myself to play around the game in a way that even if the initial pass doesn't work, I'm gonna find a way around it. But if it does work, I'm getting a fat nut. And that makes Celebi extremely enticing in my eyes. So forget about the defensive sets, I think they're trash. Even though sometimes I'll run them. But honestly, if I run defensive Celebi, you can be sure I'm very likely to run... Well, obviously I'm gonna run a spinner, I don't believe in spinless Celebi. And I'm likely to run Magneton as well. Otherwise, defensive Celebi get overrun by spikes too much. I also don't really like Celebi being this prone to getting dugged away as a defensive Pokemon. But offensive set, yeah, they're my jam. So I've been a big fan of CM Pass and SD Pass. All kinds. Usually on SD Pass nowadays, I'm very often gonna use the rock coverage because I don't want to get phased away by Zapdos and Moltres. That's what I was saying earlier, by the way. So you know, like people gonna put Moltres, Zapdos, or Charizard on the team, and they're gonna be like, oh yeah, I can stop the chain. I can have a tool against Celebi, and then you can just run like max speed HP rock, even like absolute max speed ancient power. Because HP Rock always reduces the speed IV to 30, so you would always be slower than Jolly Charizard. But you can run Ancient Power and you just one-shot Charizard, or like you go for the tiny one-shot. Yeah, extremely good in my opinion. Also, against defensive teams, if you run that alongside, you are always gonna run Magneton for Skarm anyway. But if you can fit in a spinner, you are gonna have multiple use of it, and at some point you're gonna find a window where you pass and you just get going. CM Pass just very strong as well. On CM Pass, I've been liking Leech Seed in general, because Leech Seed, once again, you're gonna find a window at some point. If they send a Fraser on Leech Seed, it's getting rolled down. So at some point the Fraser has to rest. And well, if it's a defensive phaser, is rest. If it doesn't rest, it's getting rolled on. So once again, you're fine. Also, while doing all of that, Celebi still have a nice defensive profile. It's gonna soak up status, gonna switch into waters, and it can be a threat itself. Like, you know, I don't really run that myself nowadays, but CM, Giga Drain, HP Fire, Balance Pass, that's a threat in itself. But I don't really like this set too much nowadays, because once again, you're gonna just struggle against Moltres, Charizard, especially. Zapdos, you are gonna be fine overall, even though HP Ice is like more common than ever, maybe. I don't know, maybe I'm just paranoiac about H-Clat. But yeah, for all these reasons, I think Celebi is really good. Leech Seed 3 attacks is very solid too. Not really my jam, it's not the kind of team I use, but I reckon they are a very consistent take on Skarmory offense, and that's no surprise that a lot of people have been doing great later runs with them. Just not my kind of stuff. Then could I drink some water? 1 second. Moving up to Dug. I'm putting Dug this high because, much like Celebi, I like, and something else that I said earlier, I like checkmate strategy. I think Dugtrio defense in general is a very strong approach against multiple teams, and it, like some games you just checkmate, you know. You get a Spice up early, then you just sack the most appropriate mon in the situation. You revenge kill with Dug. Nothing your opponent can do about it. Just very solid. Beside that, it's also very much on my mind. When I build myself, I hate defensive Pokemon that are prone to getting fucked up by Celebi. Yep. Not by Celebi, by Dugtrio. So it's both on my mind as a builder, like defensively and offensively. Dug offense, I'm usually not much of a fan, unless I can fit a spinner. But I still think they are good. Just I prefer it on defense. And I think defense Dug is just very strong and has many variations based on whatever you think you're gonna face or whatever you think is more meta right now. It's no wonder that we see so many variations of like the Vagen archetype, aka Milotic, Skarm, Dug, Claydol, Blissey, and then one last, which covers whatever you think is like most important to cover at a given time. But yeah, Dugtrio just really good. Also offensive Dug, as in playing Dug offensively, not always in a defensive way, as in I sack something, I send Dug. Just switching Dug on a expected move that's not gonna kill allows you to get such high advantages. Sometimes it completely changes the pace of a game. For example, like you just switch Dugtrio on a Celebi, clicking HP Fire or Leech Seed. You didn't lose a Pokemon, you take one for free, and yeah, you completely open up the game for yourself. Okay, so then I put Claydol. Most people know I'm a big Claydol fan. It's quite weird to put it this high because realistically it's not really a Pokemon that wins game, but the way I see it is that Claydol make anything work. I actually really believe that Skarmory Claydol plus 4 is pretty much always gonna work as long as you don't like completely ignore some key Pokemon. Like obviously you're gonna be weak to water off the bat. But yeah, Claydol just makes anything work because it can pivot pretty much against some of the most the most important moves of ADV, aka you pivot into Zapdos, T-Bolt, and most Pokemon Earthquake. Spin and Boom are just both excellent tools to either check whatever is in front of you through Boom or reset the field with Spin and make sure you don't just slowly lose to spikes. It's not that easy to use, but once you get good at Claydol, I feel like any team with it is gonna work in some way. It's obviously an abusable Pokemon because it has a very little offensive presence, and if you give it offensive EVs, it's not that tanky. But you don't need it to do it this much. That's the thing with Claydol, you just need to use it like maybe 2 or 3 times per game. Once to spin, once to boom. Sometimes you don't even spin, and you just boom directly. It's also like, except against Water Stab, you're probably always gonna tank a hit and threaten a big damage back with Earthquake or a Boom. So even if it doesn't hardcut or anything, it's pretty much check the entirety, even against Water. Like offensive Starmie doesn't even okay if you have some bulk and you threaten the 1 KO back, and you can pivot into T-Bolt. So yeah. It just really fits the way I see the tier, because whenever I build, I make sure I'm not gonna slowly lose to Skarm, and I make sure I'm not gonna like straight up lose to DD Dragon Dancers or Aerodactyl, and Claydol pretty much check all of this in one slot every time. Then I go to Jirachi. So Jirachi, just extremely good to me. It has its flaws, obviously. It's one of the most annoying part of Jirachi to me is being Dug Bait. If it wasn't Dug Bait, it would be much higher. It just, in my opinion, one of the best defensive profile in the tier, because Wish on a Sand immunity is not only a very unique trait, but also amazing in all kind of teams. CM Jirachi, once again, very good. Like I would have to check, but it's the only good, so to speak, Calmine Sweeper that is immune to Scent. Yeah, Sub CM very good at divining matchups. CM 3 attacks also pretty strong, especially if you don't face T with Bliss. It's always somewhat checked by a lot of physical attackers, so it's kind of anchored in an offensive way. And even in defensive way, it can be anchored because it hates status. And it hates Dug, which is why it's only like 9th to me. But even then, I just think Wish on a Rock Resist is too good to pass up. Like to me, it just like Wish Protect just doesn't die. You can even use defense. You can use full defense, and you can realistically switch into Swampert and 1v1 it. But you're often, like, if you play passively with Jirachi, you're often gonna be axed because you have to wish protect against a ton of stuff, and one Fire Blast, crit or burn is gonna pretty much seal the deal. Also, Magneton can switch on you, take a hit, party with you, and then it's also unquote, but yeah, just really strong anyway. Not really anything big or new to say about Jirachi. I just think Wish Checked is an amazing defensive profile. It pairs very well with like Claydol. Like long term, Jirachi plus Claydol is very good against Skarm without resorting to Magneton. Then you have Gengar, so most people rank Gengar higher. Personally, I'm not that big of a fan because while I think... So the way I see it, I think Gengar, Spikes, Sand is the most neutral archetype in ADV, as in when you use that, you're gonna be fine against the whole tier. Like even if you face Magneton plus Claydol, Gengar is gonna give you some options. And also, I will mention that the two best ADV later runs so far, by H-Lat and Kurtz, have been achieved with Sand Spikes Gengar. So clearly Gengar is like one of the big player of ADV. But I'm only ranking it this low because I think it's awkward to use whenever I use it myself. I don't know. I just hate the mind games that come with Gengar, because whenever you lose a mind game with Gengar, it's such a huge setback. Like the way I put Gengar on my team, it's supposed to check X and Y, and then it's gonna take some chip because, I don't know, I tried to play around Claydol and I took up Psychic or something, and then suddenly it doesn't check anything else. Also, whenever I put Gengar on the field, even if I pivot it well, I feel like the best neutral move to make pro is gonna be Will-O-Wisp, and 25% of the time you are not doing anything. It's also awkward to pick a moveset with it because I always want I want D-Bomb to play around Claydol, I want Taunt to prevent Blissey from healing for free, I want coverage for all of Swampert, Zapdos, Celebi, Salamence, I want Woe. It's always awkward to me. Even more so than Jirachi, which is why I'm putting it this low. Then I'm also putting in this high compared to how much I use it, because it's like way too important to respect in the builder. I feel like, honestly, the biggest Pokemon to respect in the builder are Skarmory and Gengar, especially together. So yeah, it's still gonna be quite high. Then we have Mance. Mance is amazing as well. I think it's one of the best offensive Pokemon in the tier. It's just that myself, I'm not that much of an offensive player, so usually I use it less than the Pokemon above it. But I still respect it highly because it's just such a great offensive profile. Also, Intimidate on offensive more like that with that speed gives you so much playing room if you play it well against the physical Mon. Like, it's not that far-fetched to use Mance as a T-Tar switch, because often T-Tar is gonna want to click Earthquake or Focus Punch to make progress against something like Pert. You just go Mance instead, you can reverse the momentum immediately with the threat of Brick Break. Mixed Mance is also, like, honestly, I think Mixed Mance is one of the best Pokemon in the tier, like with Gengar, especially as a Spikes abuser. I'm very, very... it's very much on my mind when I make a team, and that's also why I'm a big fan of Spadef Zapdos, because I feel it's one of the only Pokemon that make me feel somewhat safe against Mixed Mance, thanks to the not being weak to Spikes. And even then, Mixed Mance can adapt to Zapdos by just picking Rock Slide, but usually it's gonna come at a cost. But yeah, Mixed Mance Spikes is also something I consider to be the ABC of ADV, like the most consistent playstyle. I think my best run ever was when I was using Spikes Mixed Mance. So yeah, it's still very high to me. I would consider putting him above Jirachi, but I'm more of a Jirachi builder myself than Mance, but yeah, amazing. The only thing that's a bit awkward with Mance to me is that it's quite prediction reliant, because when you get it on the field, it's gonna 8 status. It's gonna have to avoid risking taking damage in general, I guess. I mean, that works for everything, but like against a lot of Pokemon, there is the threat of Ice Beam. So for example, like you pivot Mance onto a Swampert, for example, like on Earthquake or Surf. Then you have the threat of HP Grass, but you don't really wanna click HP Gross and do nothing on a, I don't know, Aero Pivot or Blissey. But if you risk staying in and clicking your stab, or just making a prediction, you risk dying. And it lacks a very strong neutral move, something like Moltres Air, for example. But Moltres is an issue. But yeah. DD Mance, always good. DD Mance Spikes, very good as well. I've been using some CB Mance as well. I feel like CB Mance is a big offense limiter. Yeah, not much else to say, honestly. And then I put Magneton extremely high. I reckon it's a very flawed Pokemon, but the way I see Skarmory's impact in ADV impacts the way I see Magneton, because even if I like using spinners, if using the spinner was all it took to feel good and be good against Skarmory, we would know by now. And it's not the case. I just feel Magneton trapping Skarmory is just a huge progress maker for a lot of team. And a ton of Skarmory team like don't really prepare too well against Magneton. Not Magneton itself, but especially Magneton Spinner. You limit a ton of team's potential when you are able to remove Skarmory's rolling abilities early, and also remove the spikes early. A lot of Pokemon become much less dangerous when they don't have the spike support. And yeah, I feel like Magneton Spinner is just very strong in a metagame infested by spikes. And despite Magneton's flaws, I'm always gonna feel drawn toward it because of that. I also think it enables a lot of Battle Pass strategies, and I like Battle Pass in general. Or at least I feel it's strong, so I'm gonna be drawn toward using Magneton. The thing is, like, when you use Battle Pass strats, oftentimes, even if you trap Skarmory getting one spikes is enough for them to still have a good chance, a fighting chance, when they have, like, whenever they have Skarm plus, I don't know, Mance or Aerodactyl. But if you are able to make a Battle Pass strategy with both Magneton and a Spinner, then you are really in business sometimes. Obviously, it's hard to make a consistent team when you occupy 2 slots to just pretty much Skarmory. But even then, like, it's such an upside, and Skarmory is like the most used Pokemon at high level, at least with T-Tar. So it's not that much of a risk to hard prepare for it. And Magneton is just that guy, you know. Besides that, I'm gonna say you can often cheat by not running HP Fire, considering Forretress isn't a popular pick from many players. So you can use it also somewhat as a Swampert check on offense. Doesn't work that well, but at least it's gonna force the Swampert out, which is sometimes all you need, at least one time. Yeah, and sometimes I really recommend to use Magneton to get the one-shot Skarm. You don't want Skarm to stick around by clicking Roar and being a sack for later, or getting 2 spikes. But sometimes, especially if you have a Spinner, it's fine to drop Magnet or drop some special attack if you want to use Magneton as a like one-time check to something, or just to run leftovers. Like on some teams especially, it can be an okay Zapdos pivot, and that's quite important to some teams. Yep. I'm already realizing that it's been 38 minutes and I've only covered the S and A ranks. I hope it's not too long for you guys, but yeah. If you came to this video, you know what you were expecting anyway, so I'm just gonna keep rambling. Next up is Blissey. So we entered the B ranks. I feel like all these Pokemon are quite good, but are quite much more flawed than the one above, which is why I made the distinction. So I think Blissey is obviously one of the main driving force of ADV, both when you use it and both, especially when you prepare for it, because you really don't want to be weak to Blissey, otherwise it's just gonna completely dominate you. Insane defensive profile, I don't need to explain what it does. Obviously, the only reason I put Blissey this low is I think it's really abusable by a ton of Pokemons. It's gonna be an entry point for a ton of breakers. It's also gonna be usually like a reasonably free spikes or spin. That goes for a lot of Pokemon, but like that especially works with Blissey. Technically, you can fit Flamethrower in a Forretress AV meta, but even then, not an ideal. It's the best cleric though, so that's very good for defense. You always have to watch out though. If you use Blissey, you're gonna be a prime BP target. You have to watch out for Doug. You have to watch out for Subseamer, for pretty much any breaker featuring Focus Punch. Just very good, but yeah, abusable. So I try to avoid using it too much because I don't want to give my opponents too many free turns with it. Also, I feel like it's very easy to pressure with spikes, unlike something like Jirachi, which is why I tend to like Jirachi a lot, because it just heals naturally. Blissey, it's gonna have to recover pretty quickly, like softball pretty quickly. Well, not that much actually, that's like the strength of Blissey, right? Against special attacker, you don't have to softball immediately. But when spikes are up, yeah, you will have to softball at some point, and it's a free entry because Blissey doesn't return much besides status. Status are good, obviously. I don't know, it's just the way I see it. The way I build is that I'm very conscious of Blissey myself, so my team technically won't struggle too much with it. And when I use it, I feel like I can't fit every limiting move on it. Like, ideally, I feel like T-Wave is the best move you want to use to avoid getting, like, abused by the like of, I don't know, Metagross, even 3-attack Titar. But if you use T-Wave, you're missing the ability to check, I don't know, Crocoon with CM, or you're missing the ability to reset status with Hariyama. If you drop Ice Beam, you're not checking Mance too well anymore. So yeah, it's just really good though. That's why I put it this high, but just extremely abusable, and that's why I don't spam it too much. Aerodactyl, I'm not that big of a user myself, but it's one of the Pokemon that I have the most in. So whenever I build ADV, I feel like the Pokemon that I have the most in mind are Dragon Dancer, because when those set up, it's over, since there is no choice cap. Skarmory, because Spikes is amazing. Gengar, because it completely dominates the game with Spikes up and status. Dugtrio, because it traps. And Aerodactyl, because it's the fastest Pokemon with the strongest hitting move with Choice Band. And if you're not good against it, you just can't do anything about it. And I've suffered enough in the past from it to know that much. However, once you take Aerodactyl into account, I feel like it's not that strong, or at least it's very prediction reliant. It's still gonna be a good Pokemon, obviously. It's never bad, but yeah, I feel like if you want to go on a high ladder run, it's a good choice. If you want to use it in tournament, it's not my favorite personally, because I don't like the Chase Lock, I don't like how prediction reliant it is. But it's still very good. Not much else to say. We've seen some sub-protect pressure stuff from H-Clat, but that didn't really pick up alongside other players. Actually, Aerodactyl has been used quite a lot by ABR recently, and he made some teams that have been passed around that are getting a lot of traction, namely some like Skarm, Bliss, Celebi, Pert stuff, where you use Magneton early to limit the spike to 1, thanks to Magnet. And you also remove the Skarmory double edge resistance, and then you can just, like, you have a strong defensive build. You have your own spike, and you have Aerodactyl to checkmate stuff and reverse the offensive momentum. Just very popular, but it's nothing new, honestly. We've seen that in the past before, quite a bit. Just always around, always solid. Then I put Cune pretty high. I'm not that much of a Cune user myself, but I admit it's one of those Pokemon that just win games, and you have to be prepared for it in one way or another, or it's gonna run away with the game. I just feel like it has a lot of limiting factors. You have to account for spikes, you have to account for Doug in a way, actually. You have to account for Zapdos, but the thing is, Suicune can pretty much adapt to all of its checks, and when it does, it just wins the game. What else can we say about it? So, one thing worth mentioning, I feel, that I really liked seeing is the Calm variant on Crocoon that Mana has been using, because Calm Suicune, so it doesn't even run EVs, just Calm with some speed and defense. But the added special defense actually turned the tides on CM Blissey, because now I think it has to crit you to beat you. Like, outside of Sand, it doesn't 3KO anymore. And you just, like, you have pressure, so it only has 12 attempts to crit. Defensive that does absolutely nothing at +1. And even offensive, it's kind of a fine game to play, depending on the condition, obviously, but, like, it's much less threatening. Yeah. Personally, I'm not a big fan because I feel like Rokun, obviously I hate relying on Slip Talk Growth in general. It's kind of anchored to use, at least the way I play it, I don't know. I feel like I never want to switch on it early. I don't want to rest. I only want to use it in the late game, but if I use it in the late game, I feel like you can never like for sure create the right field condition for it to just sweep. I don't know, it's a very up in the air Pokemon, kind of, and I'm too controlling to be a fan. At least of Rokun. I still like Rokun in some teams because I feel like it's got a great defensive profile, but I have like very precise condition in mind whenever I use it because I feel like it requires spikes for Roar to be useful early. I feel like it requires at least one of Wish or Aroma, so it's not too passive. But like, yeah, it's gonna be good otherwise. It's it's one of the few good Pokemon into offensive meta as well, like defensive Kun. Especially if you do not have Sand on the field. Yeah. It's also like one of the only ways that I feel somewhat okay against Snorlax. Defensive, like Snorlax if I use a defensive team. Like obviously there is Celebi, but Suicune is actually pretty nice against defensive Snorlax. Either as a sponge or just because Rokun doesn't take that much for +1 body slam on Cursor Restless. It's not a common set nowadays, but I've run into a few, so... And Suicune often save my ass against them. Then you have Snorlax. So, unlike many people, I actually like defensive Snorlax, as in Cursor Rest. I feel like it is the right field condition, it auto-wins against a lot of meta-game teams. But it's to be used only here and there. It's obviously got its issue against the popular Skarm, Gengar, Tita, Metagross, stuff like that. Otherwise on offense, Snorlax is still the end-all-be-all trader. It makes anything works. The team are gonna be wonky. But in tournament games, that's fine. That's fine. You have to take into account that against another good player, you are very likely gonna like outplay the whole game for once and have a strong edge in the team builder. So Snorlax's ability to patch up any team is great in this regard. And it gives you like a check to pretty much... It's kind of like Claydol. It's a check to anything in the team. It doesn't die, it threatens, boom. In some games you're gonna have teams where Snorlax cannot be checked well. And like you just get a kill with Curse plus one move. Either Shadow Ball, Body Slam, Earthquake, and then you're getting another with Self-Destruct, and it's a 2-for-1 trade. It's not like favor. Yeah. Obviously it has its flaws, but yeah, nothing new to say about it. Milotic pretty high to me because it's kind of like Celebi in a way. So when I say earlier that I like to use Celebi because in the meta game it's just gonna like completely dominate some teams. Thanks to the threat of Battle Pass. But it's more of an offensive way. I feel like Milotic is the same in a defensive way. Like Milotic just completely blanket walls some Pokemon. And against some players, just bringing Milotic in the right condition is an auto-win. And I do think it's good to... Like, I don't think it's fishing, you know? I don't think you bring a Milotic team to fish. I just think you bring a good Milotic team. And... it's the kind of Pokemon when it works, it has a very strong upside, you know? Like, for example, if you bring Swampert, some matchup is gonna be good, but it's never gonna auto-win. Milotic has this auto-win factor, because it just blanket walls some Pokemon. And I like that a lot in ADV. Well, in Pokemon in general, not only in ADV. So that's why I like Milotic overall. And the Pokemon I have in mind when I say that is gonna be like... Mixstar, Swampert, Mixmans... what else? Flygon, Moltres. Moltres kinda anchored obviously, but because you have the pressure of Will-O-Wisp plus HP Grass Quid, but still, Milotic is gonna be quite some. Charizard obviously. Charizard, like, quite popular pick. Against all those Pokemons, there is not much else I would like than to have Milotic on my team. So yeah, pretty high on it myself because of all of that. Then you have Flygon. Flygon is pretty shit, but it's good in Superman. and I said earlier that I think Superman is a strong archetype. The only reason Superman works is because of the combination of Skarmory, Special Zapdos, and physically defensive Flygon. So I still put Flygon quite high because, once again, in some matchup, it's just gonna auto-win. Some people are gonna try to use offensive pressure through, like, Digitar, Skarmory, Aerodactyl. Flygon is gonna be extremely good against that. Probably the best thing you would have, actually. Well, maybe, like... Well, it's the best thing you would like to have while still having an offensive pressure through spikes and offensive Pokemon yourself in the form of like Iron and Gengar, because if you want to counter those, otherwise you're gonna have to go in a, well, in my opinion, defensive direction with Magneton Spinner. Flygon allows for more offensive flexibility while being strong itself against those. And you will see game, like if you watch, I would have to check... I think it's Rising and Extra and Classic recently, like you have Flygon completely dominating the game and the only threat is Agility Metagross. Yeah, nothing new for Flygon in my eyes, just that I rate Superman highly, and for this reason Flygon is high as a result. Then you have Starmie. I think Starmie is quite made as a Pokemon. But it does the job. It's one of the few usable spinner in my opinion. Funnily enough, so it's gonna sound weird, but whenever I use Starmie, I feel like if I face a Skarmory team, it's often gonna be quite anchored because Starmie gets pressured pretty easily by the combination of like Toxic Scar, Pursuit Titar, and Gengar spin blocking. So Starmie is gonna be quite pressured and it's very anchored to use in those conditions. But funnily enough, when you don't face a Spikes team, Starmie is quite an interesting profile because it's kind of like Milotic in a way. It's gonna blanket check some Pokemons, treat anti-wave, which is quite good. And it's gonna just recover spam on some of these and just come out of top. So of those Pokemon that I think of when I bring this up, it's gonna be like some Metagross variants, Claydol in a way. It's less tanky than Milotic, which is why I only say in a way, because like Earthquake crit. Like the thing is, if you switch Starmie on offensive move, you are often gonna want to recover, and that gives the opponent the chance to fish for a crit for a few times, which is why, like for example, Starmie is a good Swampert check in theory, but Swampert has the luxury to just spam Earthquake and get a crit at some point. But yeah, it's still okay. But it's actually a pretty good switch to Mance. It pivots pretty well into Moltres. It's gonna pivot into Blissey actually, often, because T-Ball Blissey isn't that common. It's gonna pivot into Mance very well. Into Breloom. Somewhat okay against Hariyama, but yeah, it's kind of annoying to go through for spikeless teams sometimes, because then Starmie doesn't really get pressured, and T-Wave recover is like not bad. Not bad. It can even like somewhat check T-Tar at the point. That's the thing. That's why I put Starmie this low, because all the Pokemon is supposed to check. It's not that great against it, but it's also okay. Like especially if you manage to get a T-Wave off, then you can just recover until you get the full power, and then like Starmie completely comes out on top. You have to keep in mind that Starmie is extremely passive. It's kind of like Milotic there. So against some archetype, it's really bad, especially if you face like CM spam or CM spam stuff. CM pass, CM spam here. Then Starmie gets completely abused by the lack of Celebi, and even like Suicune in a way, Jirachi as well, even though you always have the T-Wave tool obviously, but yeah. It's anchored, it's not that good, I know, but it's still a fast spin with a fast T-Wave, and nothing else can do that, while still having a okay-ish defensive profile into some popular Pokemon. So that's why it's still used quite a bit in my opinion, at least by me. And then obviously there is the whole offensive Starmie deal, which isn't like really my kind of jam, but it's there and it's a threat, and you have to keep it in mind. It's also a solid CM Pass variant, so that's one of the reasons I've been liking Starmie actually a bit more. I feel like on CM spam, it's a pretty good. It's like, for very obvious reason, it's a good CM Pass recipient. But also on CM spam, if you use Magneton, which is like just makes sense naturally because it allows you to remove the premier phaser of the tier and also free up the Celebi moveset. So you remove Skarmory's Magneton, and then Starmie combines as both an amazing CM Pass recipient and a spinner. And once you take away the one spike that Skarmory got to have, you completely limit the offensive potential of the like of Aerodactyl Mance against you. And also it means that Celebi gets so much more defensive leeway and so much more opportunity to CM Pass. So it's very good in this kind of team. Then your Forretress. I'm not gonna go on over another Forretress Tyrant. I've talked about it before. I legit made a Smogon post about it. It's good, but it's anchored because fire weakness and slow and all that. There is nothing new for me to talk about, honestly, about Forretress. If you get good with it, it's still worth running, obviously. But I rarely feel very safe with it because it just anchored in too many ways. And I feel like against other good players that know how to play around Forretress, I don't feel confident enough to bring it often. But here and there, I will bring it because Forretress team are solid when you know how to pilot them. Then you have Moltres. Nothing much to say about Moltres. I feel like it's quite a popular choice. I'm not the biggest fan myself because I feel like it's very reliant on spike, and whenever you spike, I don't like to use Pokemon that are too reliant on spikes to work because I'm always paranoid about running into max spinner. Like I'm always paranoid against that, and Moltres to me is like not a real Pokemon if you face max spinner plus anything that's supposed to check it, like max spinner Blaze, max spinner Milo, mostly that. But like obviously it's one of the best spike abuser because it has a very strong natural stab that nothing really pivots into very well. Zapdos, for example, you can pivot a ground type into T-Bolt. Mance, Dragon Claw isn't that powerful. Moltres just had that strong fire stab. But yeah, one reason I actually like Moltres, it's actually a great switch to Charizard defensively and other Moltres. So I've been liking Rest Moltres on like Superman because it allows me to switch into those safely and being spike immune while that. And I think that's one of the only Pokemon that can do that, like switch into fire while being spike immune. So I still like the defensive niche a lot. Offensively, it's very good, obviously, just not my kind of Pokemon. I also feel like it's quite prediction reliant because you don't really wanna flamethrower into Tyranitar or Aerodactyl early, or even into Bliss. Like you just wanna roll that. You just wanna roll Tita instead. But obviously, you also don't want to, I don't know, stain on Skarm, and you don't wanna roll on Toxic. You don't wanna Will-O-Wisp on Toxic sometimes. I don't know. It's like once again, it all goes back to what I was saying earlier. I like the checkmate stuff. I like something more direct, you know. And Moltres to me it's not that direct. I don't know. That's why it's only this low. Then Gyarados. So I'm gonna say the Pokemon so everything is B is very consistent to me. Everything is C has quite big flaws, but pretty good as well. Yeah. So Gyarados, it's pretty much War Salamence, but amazing into water types, especially Swampert, compared to Mance at least, which is why it's there. I always mention about how like Gyarados is two little things away from being a fucking menace in ADV, and basically if it had a rock or flying move, so you could run all of flying, rock, earthquake on one moveset, it would be much better. And obviously if it had slightly more speed, so at +1 it would outspeed Aerodactyl while being adamant, that would be awesome. It's still quite a unique offensive profile. I think it's good, honestly. Personally, I'm a big fan of it in SD Pass, because SD Pass allows it to make up for the lack of attack slightly, especially if you run Jolly, because unlike something like Salamence at +1, it's pretty much always gonna fail to KO the like of Titar, and Titar can like legit check you once, which is annoying, or even check you in the late game by hard switching on DD and returning Rock-Slide KO while not dying from Earthquake. But yeah, the ability to not being quad weak to ice is very good in those teams. It actually allows you to not completely fucking die to Ice Beam Suicune. It's better against Blissey, it's better against Spurt, obviously. It's also somewhat worse into other Pokemon, but SD Pass makes up for the difference. I also am a fan of its typing on some teams, because, so for example, if you use I feel some defensive teams are good, but they really struggle against Swampert. Offensive Swampert, that is. And Gyarados is going to be much better than Mance in that slot to pivot into Swampert while not risking taking too much damage. And something very obvious that comes to mind when I say that is let's say Titar, Skarm, Zapdos, Speed of Zapdos, Jirachi, and I don't know, maybe Flygon or something. It's gonna be, or even Aerodactyl. It's gonna be a structure that I like, but offensive Swampert has no switching, and Gyarados gonna somewhat make up for it. Yeah, I also feel like in those teams, you can just use Jirachi plus Gyarados as a Swampert counterplay, and it's gonna work out, because Jirachi gonna take on every EQ less variant of Swampert. And every EQ variant of Swampert cannot really touch Gyarados, so even if you switch into it early and you want to be fully healthy in the late game for a sweep, you can just switch to it, you can just switch past it, and it's fine. Also, much like Mance, you have the Intimidate factor that allows you to play around some offensive threat while being on the offensive yourself. Just think it's nice. It struggles, it's one of the 3 Pokemon that aids the 4 Pokemon actually, with Moltres, Zapdos, and Charizard, that aid Metagross rock sliding all the time nowadays, but it is what it is. It has its flaws, obviously. Most people know them, but yeah. I know some people run T-Wave variants. I still haven't really tapped into that potential. I don't know, it doesn't really interest me. Then I'm going over Heracross. Heracross is like, everyone knows about Heracross. I don't know what else should I add. I just think it's quite good still. It's one of the only few Pokemon that I consider to be a good sleep talker. Like, if I really am feeling that my opponent is a likely Breloom user, I feel like Heracross is my favorite Pokemon to bring against that, because you can just use Sleep Toll 3 attacks and you get the Guts boost and you don't die to Breloom yourself, so it's not a risk to switch into it, and then you get good potential out of it. And you're still using a good Pokemon, so even if you don't run into Breloom, you still have Heracross, which is a solid abuser of a lot of defensive profile, and yeah. Obviously, whenever you face Salamence, you cannot hate it, because then you have to predict more and stuff like that. You have the Heracross weakness, Dugtrio weakness, stuff like this. Still a solid Pokemon. Yeah. It's funny because I realize, and you realize by now, that I always like when a Pokemon has a clear defensive profile to me, like a clear defensive niche. So for example, if I use Moltres, it's like a lot of it is because personally I want to have this safety net against other Moltres and Charizard rather than using Moltres offensive profile. And if I use Heracross, I like the offensive profile, but it's also mostly because I want to have the safety net against Breloom now. Yep, that's how I think. And that's why I rank the Pokemon the way I rank them. So next we have Breloom. Unlike Moltres and Heracross, like I just said, Breloom has actually no defensive profile, but it's a good way to start an offensive assault thanks to Spore. But once you Spore something, it's kind of bid by after that, so that's why it's only ranked this low. Yeah, I still like using sub lead sheet sometimes. It's like a very mid set, but when it gets going, it auto wins. And like it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I like Pokemon that have very strong upsides. Like, you know, I was talking about Battle Pass Celebi variants. I like them because Milotic and Breloom like fits the same niche to me. It just less clear because you can never know if you're gonna get this fucking amazing Breloom matchup with Subleech. But I still like you to use it because I feel like my Subleech, the way I use Subleech Loom often works out. And it's just gonna get so much going and like give me so much offensive leeway that I like to use it. And then we have Hariyama. Hariyama is pretty good, honestly. I've talked about his defensive profile in the past. Nothing has really changed for me. It's just good, honestly. If you want to know more about Hariyama, just watch BKC's video. I don't know if there is anything else I should bring up about it. It's just solid. Like, solid into the tier. Knockoff is amazing. It's the best knockoff user, much better than Hariyama in my Armaldo in my opinion, because it actively pressures the like of like. It's not like Metagross or Swampert can switch into Hariyama safely. Meanwhile, they can against Armaldo. Yep, it's gonna like check Titar all the time, at least once. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Just bit awkward to use because it's kind of passive in a way. So I like to be a bit more proactive, but it's fine. It's fine. Then you have Charizard. Charizard, I honestly only put. I only ranked despite I never use it despite never using it myself because I feel like it's kind of like Mance and Moltres in the way that it's prediction reliant to make clear progress. Unlike Moltres and Mance, and Mixed Mance, it's not really spikes reliant against many builds, like against anything except Milotic, and Milotic just works even with Spike Up. It's a good Pokemon, it's just not my type. Bit prediction reliant, no clear defensive niche. Even though, unlike Moltres, you don't mind taking damage with Charizard because you want to be in Blaze range a lot of the time. It's definitely a threat. It's definitely on my mind when I bring teams because I don't want to be too weak to it. But yeah, it's also like it's too weak, unlike Moltres where you want to use Fire Blast. I really don't. So you want to use Fire Blast unlike Moltres, which can get away with Flamethrower thanks to the highest special attack. And I actually do not subscribe to the double fire stab mindset on Charizard because I don't know if you've heard about it, but some people like to run like Flamethrower plus Overheat because you have the consistency of the guaranteed accuracy move, and then if you need the power, you have Overheat. And I think that's fine on Moltres, even though I don't like it. I think that's fine on Moltres because Moltres is so powerful that you pretty much can get away with just stab plus one coverage move. But on Charizard, I feel like what makes Charizard so good is the ability to have access to pretty much all of the wall-breaking move in the tier. So that means all of Beat Up, Focus Punch, Dragon Claw, HP Ice, HP Grass. Yep, all of that. And I feel like if you run 2 fire move, you just take away what makes Charizard good. So I wouldn't run it personally. It's good though. It's a good Pokemon, just not really my preference, which is why I predicted this low. Alright. So I feel like from this point onward, we are moving away from the established good Pokemon to the niche picks. I feel like everything below is a niche pick to me. Everything above is clearly on my mind when I T-build, at least in a way that I should counter it. Everything below, I don't even think about it too much, and I know I'm gonna be okay against it. And if I use it myself, it's for a clear reason. So first, I have Ninjask there. So it's very high, but honestly, when it goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? At this point, you know what I'm talking about. I like the auto-win matchups, and I don't mean the super fishy stuff because I think you can make quite somewhat okayish consistent teams with Ninjask. It's actually got a nice toolkit, and it's very much a beneficiary of the lack of Tyranitar, as in Tyranitar is still present, obviously, but it's not 100% usage or close to it like it used to be in the past. I feel like Ninjask outside of Sand got a shit ton of opportunity to speed pass. And you don't always have to speed pass to Marowak and try to win 6-0. It's just one of the many applications of Ninjask. But speed passing to Pokemon like even Metagross is good. Because now you can run like boom 3 attacks while outspeeding the whole tier, so it makes it an even better wall breaker. You can just speed pass to Suicune. Suicune is actually fucking amazing as a speed recipient, by the way. So many Pokemon you can now set up on or just trade 1v1 while outspeeding, so it works out in your favor. It's gonna be good against like some Celebi variant, for example. If you run sub on Suicune, you can just sub in front of Blissey now and just fucking win. Against Zapdos, it's good. Yeah. Against Jirachi, they can't toxic you anymore. Against Gengar, you can like CM on T-balls and sub on Row and sub on Boom, stuff like that. Mens can't even like outspeed you and get a big hit off. Aerodactyl either. Yeah. Anyway, like Starmie, you can just sub on T-Wave again. Yeah. And I think, yeah, honestly, a lot of Pokemon gains of getting the speed, but the thing is, there are only so many ways to use Ninjask, and the Ninjask team, even if they have some flaws, obviously, because it's like, I don't have to explain why I think at this point, but when they work, they just wins. And I like this factor, because I feel like against like a specific matchup, I'm just gonna win, and against another, if they don't have the auto loss matchup, I can still find a way to play around it. Like if you watch some of my game with Ninjask, sometimes I just don't auto win with the one-time Ninjask into Marowak, but you can still find ways to play around some lines, and like it's just you know, a matter of outplaying or just getting outplayed. But it's not like you just auto lose when you bring Ninjask. Like you're gonna have some auto loss, but you can mitigate that in the builder. And I think it's not that bad. It's not that inconsistent, which is why I'm putting it this side, because at least the way I see it, when I look at my opponent's team in a tournament game, I'm more gonna think about, do they lose to Ninjask or do they lose to whatever is below it? Yeah. So very much side to Ninjask with Marowak. If I think this highly of Ninjask, I'm gonna think this highly of Marowak because it's one of the premier receiver. And it also works on Agility Pass with Zapdos, because Agility Pass Zapdos is a pretty consistent good set, and Marowak is one of the good recipients that's just gonna auto win against a lot of builds once again. So yeah, it's this high for a reason. I feel like all the niche pick afterwards are pretty self-explanatory, but I'm gonna go over them quickly. So Ludicolo, the way I see it, it's a good Swampert switch. It's somewhat okay against Metagross, and it's got the Rain Dance, like the Rain Dance Swift Swimmer niche that just completely dominates some offense in the late game, which is why it's gonna be on my mind. Leech is good mid-game utility, and like I said, it's got a nice niche into Coon Swampert. However, it's actually very frail, so even like if you switch into Swampert Earthquake, you're still taking like 25, which is not like, it's not nothing, you know. It's not nothing, but it's still fine, so it's still like nice. Then P2 team in general, I'm not a big fan. They struggle against too many things I consider too dangerous to be weak against in ADV, aka Skarm, Gengar, and Aerodactyl. But it's still like, if you face a no Dugtrio user, the P2 team can have some like banging matchups, which is why it's gonna be on my mind as a result. Then Cloyster, it honestly like never downs really on me to use Cloyster, because even if I face someone who uses a lot of Magneton, I'd rather use something else than Cloyster anyway. I just think Cloyster is too ankle of Pokemon. But I still respect it, because when I use it, it's not like absolutely fucking awful. You're still getting like Spikes plus Boom. But somehow it doesn't really work well for me. I don't feel like I have the upside I'm looking for when I use it. And I see some people getting at least neutrally good matchup at high level with it. So out of respect, I put it this side. It's kind of like Charizard to me. Just out of respect for it, I put it this side. But I'm not a fan. Then Jolteon. Jolteon, just like too many weaknesses to me. I just think Claydol is too around in the meta game for me to ever feel safe using Jolteon Spikes. And if I'm not using Jolteon on Spicy, the team is gonna be kinda anchored anyway. And I feel like if I use something like that, Jolteon is gonna be my Zapdos check, but then you don't really wanna switch into T-Wave, so I don't know, it's always anchored. This is the anchored tier, by the way. All the Pokemon there are not bad, but they are anchored. And Jolteon is just not my right kind of anchored. Because even in a right matchup, it's like you have to be skilled to use Jolteon. It doesn't auto-win stuff. Unlike, it's not that I don't want to rely on skill, but if I'm gonna use something that feels matchuppy, I'd rather auto-win where it works, rather than Jolteon who still has to work for the win. Then you have Kingdra, similar profile as Ludicolo. I feel like if I use Kingdra, so unlike Ludicolo, I feel like if I use Ludicolo, it's gonna be on a more balanced team where I wanna have the Swift Swim potential in the late game while still having a defensive niche. Meanwhile, Kingdra is gonna be in a more offensive team where I want the Swift Swim potential, but I don't really need a defensive profile. And to make up for it, I'm gonna use Kingdra because it doesn't get checked. Like, it can 1v1 stuff in the late game where Ludicolo doesn't. So, for example, it's gonna be better into Tyranitar, into Salamence, into what else? Mostly those, actually. But that's big, so for offense. So that's why I'm gonna prefer Kingdra in those. Then you have Metagross. Metagross is pretty bad in itself, but you know what it does by now. It's solid into Claydol. And it auto-wins into some teams. Well, I don't know if it auto-wins anymore, but it's quite solid into some meta teams. It's always gonna be on my mind, personally. Even in the builder nowadays, I use a lot of Shadow Ball Claydol because I don't want my opponent to think they can just Metagross me. And I'm gonna consider Metagross myself against people who mostly run Claydol teams, especially if they never run Shadow Ball, because it just has this strong of a matchup when it works. And I like strong matchups for Pokemon like those, especially when, like, in general, but especially when Pokemon underutilized Pokemon like these. Then Registeel. Registeel is actually like a skillful Pokemon to use, I'm gonna say. It's just a very solid toolkit. It's a bit anchored to use at the same time, but the combination of T-Wave counter, Seismic Toss on such a bulky Pokemon, very good. I don't feel like there is much to explain about it. If you've watched ADV games in the past year, at this point, Registeel has been popping up here and there. If you really want to watch what it does, just check out Behe's game, because he uses it a lot, and it's quite consistent. Then Venusaur. I've been using some Venusaur recently. Just sleep early and Leech Seed is pretty good to get offensively started. Personally, I also like the ability to check like Swampert, Suicune, Milo, even some Zapdos set. Like, it's pretty good into spell of Zapdos, even though, like, you have to watch out for your Leech Seed PP. It's really good into water with Toxic, but they're not that popular nowadays. It's kind of a weird Pokemon to use, but it has its uses. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the main reason I've been using it. I feel like I just wanted an extra offensive touch on mid-ground balance with the benefit of sleep. Also, raw Venusaur is something you should don't discard. Like, you should think about in the builder, because it's very, very good into sub-BP Zapdos. And yeah, that's something to keep in mind, right? Because sub-BP Zapdos can just completely obliterate some defensively leaning balance. Then you have Smeargle. Smeargle is weird, but it has so much upside when it works. Just so much Pokemon, so much sets, so much good tools. Between Spore, DD, Boom, Ballon Pass, Spikes, Endeavor, stuff like this. Very weird, but in a tournament setting where your opponent has to respect your entire toolkit, it's good. I wouldn't run it more than once in a while, but when it, I feel like it has its upside, right? Jinx, kind of similar to Venusaur and Smeargle. I feel like honestly, if you wanna use Jinx and really get advantage with it, you wanna rely on Lovely Kiss, but then you have the risk of 25% of the time doing nothing against a lot of leads, so it's kind of awkward in a way. Then I also think the Jinx teams that I have in mind that I like are not that good in general, because I often use Jinx on special offense, and I'm not a big fan of special offense in general. So as a result, I'm not big on Jinx myself, because I don't feel like Jinx fits on other team as well. Unlike other similar leads like Smeargle on or Venusaur. Then you have Regice. Regice is a pretty sick defensive profile, but it's not really my jam, because once again, I feel like it's the kind of Pokemon where it's a bit awkward to use. You wanna spam T with early pretty much. The good thing about Regice is that like nothing that switches into Ice Beam likes to take T waves. That's the one big thing. Unlike Blissey, which also has the ability to run Ice Beam T wave, Blissey's Ice Beam doesn't do nearly as much as Regice, so it's not as much of a threat. For example, you can switch Swampert into Ice Beam T wave Bliss and treat like you can just do stuff okay with Earthquake. Meanwhile, Regice Ice Beam hits too hard into Swampert. Yeah, that's mostly it, but I don't know, it's a bit awkward into... It doesn't really fit my playstyle because defensively it's gonna get rolled on pretty quickly. And it's also not gonna passively heal unlike something like Jirachi. So I'm more for like Jirachi Blissey user than Regice. But on offensive team, I reckon it has its uses. I don't know. I don't really have a good explanation. I feel like it's hard to use personally, because it gets rolled on too quickly. Like, okay, it's gonna switch into... I feel like it's actually really good where it's not in Scent, because now you can actually switch into the like of Zapdos or Mance or even Celebi, and you just don't get rolled on. Meanwhile, you threaten the strong Ice Beams, and if they don't have Blissey, like, it's actually hard to switch to Regice. Then you have Vaporeon. Vaporeon, it's always the same, surpassing stuff. Yeah, nothing much to add. It's just not a strong reason enough for me to use it more than once in a while, which is why it's that low. And you have Raikou. Raikou, pretty, like, nothing has changed much. I don't think lead Raikou is something that good. However, Raikou in the back, it has its uses, just auto win some matchups. Once it, like it, but it also has those awkward matchup again, where you have too many things to get past to win. You never wanna face an Aerodactyl team either, I don't know. The same as ever, it's why this low, but it's usable once in a while. Medicham, way too prediction reliant to me. However, I admit, like, some teams you never really wanna face. Like, I feel like if you face Medicham early, you're just, I don't know, praying. It's a bit annoying though that you have to play against... Claydol popularity is quite annoying for Medicham. Obviously, because you would rather just spam the fighting move, like you have to play around Gengar, you have to play around Salamence. But if you like making random prediction and you are good at them, obviously you're gonna like Medicham. Personally, not consistent enough for me, so not as much of a fan. Undum I've talked about before. I feel like the defensive niche is well established. It's gonna be good against CM Jirachi, against CM Celebi, and even defensive Celebi. It's gonna be pretty good against Moltres too. So it fits on some team where you really want the fire immunity. Especially on team where you have like Celebi, Heracross, like Porygon to another fighter maybe. Moltres is gonna tear you down otherwise. And Undum is gonna have the niche of switching into Moltres while switching and pursuing Gengar, which enables a fighter even more. But it's still Undum, so if you're not running that, it's kinda ass. Even the Pokemon is supposed to come into its awkward, like for example I use Undum in the Kalos game. I face Gengar, switch it to T-Bolt. With one spike and send up, I'm 2 KO'd already. And even if you're not 2 KO'd, you have to predict between your stab and pursuit, because Gengar just outspeed, stay in, and like 2 KO you from there. Very awkward. But yeah. it's like the defensive niche is alluring enough for me to rank it this high, so to speak, and to build with it once in a while. Then you have Armaldo. So Armaldo, I feel like, is pretty ass because the defensive niche, so I've talked about it before, it's really good into Jirachi and Celebi in particular, unlike Hariyama, while still having the knockoff game progressing move. But like the problem is Metagross and Swampert in particular, and even Titar, can switch it to knockoff and put offensive pressure from there, and those Pokemon in particular, Metagross and Titar, don't really mind losing the item because Metagross is just gonna boom eventually. Titar is just gonna apply offensive pressure and is really a good defensive piece, especially to Armaldo teams. The thing I like about Armaldo actually, is that I think it's actually very good into Superman. That's something I noticed. I noticed Armaldo into Superman, especially the Mischievous teams that gets used quite a bit, the ABR build, you know. Armaldo is no switch actually. Like, the only way to switch it to Armaldo is to put Skarmory on a timer or put Flygon on a timer. And Flygon actually needs the leftovers to stay healthy. And the thing is, if they switch Flygon into Armaldo, they are now much weaker to any physical Pokemon in the game. You obviously don't want to switch Zapdos into Rock Slide. You obviously don't want to switch Moltres into Rock Slide. Mischievous isn't a switch either. Gengar, you don't want to lose your leftovers either. So honestly, Armaldo has surprisingly rose to me as a good Superman check. I have also seen some people use SD Spin, so no knockoff, but SD Spin is actually quite solid alongside Magneton because it's gonna. So you're gonna have the benefit of having Magneton Spin against Skarmory teams. But Armaldo is actually very good, like I said earlier, against Celebi and... it's gonna be very good against Celebi and Jirachi, and those two in particular are often threats to especially Celebi, to Magneton plus Spinner defensive builds. So like if you wanna beat the Skarmory builds, you like the allure of defensive Magneton Spin, but you're gonna be weak to Celebi. And Armaldo is a nice way to fix that. Alright, so next, Lunaton. It's like, unlike Celebi, CM Ice Beam pretty much return every phaser, and you are immune to Sand, and you have a good matchup into Salamence. So after, like, people knows the Lunaton niche, but it's still ranked world for many reasons. So it's only this low. Then you have Regirock. So the way I see Regirock nowadays, personally, is that I think if you use a team where you would like a similar profile to Metagross early, but you wanna have Metagross in the back, so clear example that comes to mind, SD Pass. Metagross is often very good early to bring up the water, bring up the Skarmory. And you wanna use it, you would rather keep Metagross in the back as a SD recipient, then Regirock is gonna fill that niche similarly. And that's the way I use it. I feel like it's quite mid otherwise, but yeah. So yeah, similar to Metagross, but you keep Metagross in the back for many reasons. Like, you know, Agility Metagross, Clay Body, stuff like this. Or even if you wanna... Because like, for example, if you use Metagross with leftovers, its defensive profile is like quite bad nowadays early. Which is why you're gonna use Metagross, so you can keep your Regirock, so you can keep your Metagross in the back. Then you have Weezing. So Weezing is hard to describe to me. It just so happens that someone gave me a Weezing team, I tried it and it was fine. I still don't see personally a reason to use it. Like when I build, I never think, oh yeah, when I use Weezing for X or Y reason. I would rather look at other Pokemons, but I tried it and it was fine. So yeah, I don't really know what's gonna ever tick for me to use Weezing. It just so happened to be good on the team I was given. Then Articuno niche to me is that if you want to use an even more stally defensive variant of Superman, where you now have a cleric on the team, and you have so the main reason to use Articuno for me, if you wanna have a strong counterplay to Swampert on Superman, because otherwise Superman kinda struggle against offensive Swampert. And you also wanna have some kind of like alternative Suicune counterplay, so it's not all up to defensive Zapdos. Because now you have like Articuno is okay against it. Depending on the set once again, and depending on your Articuno choice of moves. Are you gonna use Ace? Are you gonna use Roar? Are you gonna Sleep Talk? Stuff like this. Then you have Umbreon. So Umbreon, I think, is definitely pretty ass. But you know, it's good against Gengar, right? It's like very good against Gengar. So that would be the reason to use it. It's yeah, I really am not a fan, but it's good against Gengar, so can hate when Gengar is such a big player. Alakazam, I still think it's pretty bad, but you know, I've been using it as a lead on special offense. I've said before, I don't think special offense in particular is good. If I use special offense, I would probably still rather lead Jinx. But Alakazam still, I don't know, it's fun to use, honestly. I don't have a strong reason. Then honestly, I just ranked Alakazam because I used it in a tournament game, so I felt like I had to rank it. But it's so bad that I just put it at the bottom. And Machamp is probably better than Zam, but I at least brought Machamp, Alakazam to 2 tournament games. Meanwhile, Machamp I only played on the ladder. I didn't even feel like bringing it to tournament games. So if I use a fighter, I'm always gonna go to one of Heracross, Breloom, Hariyama. On an agility pass team, I can't see Machamp used because he's gonna outspeed the TR +2 while having like the whole cover range and not like Omega dying to flying stab unlike Heracross. But yeah, it's pretty mid otherwise. And that's pretty much it actually. So I've talked about everything. I'm still gonna go over some Pokemon that I didn't rank, but I still think are usable. I didn't rank them because I didn't ladder with them, I didn't bring them to our tournament games, and I didn't see them enough being used by other players to give them a ranking. So among those Pokemons, Arcanine is usable. I've used it before. Fire type with extreme speed, intimidate or flash fire, like it's like somewhat solid on some teams. Blastoise, I will mention, I've seen Blue Zero, so Blue Energy Zero go for like a ladder record with it, which has the unique niche of spinning, and so it has a unique niche of spin plus roar or ace. And we actually used that like way back in the net battle era in the French metagame. It's hard to justify in a team error, but yeah, if you really need those 2 moves, maybe consider it. Blaziken, honestly, I would probably rank around here. Or maybe even higher, because against typical TSS, they have no switch. But it's still extremely... So it's like Charizard, it's like extremely prediction reliant. Like Charizard, it pretty much can't switch into anything. At least Charizard can pivot into Earthquake. But Blaziken is a strong lead because it doesn't have the electric weakness, so you can actually afford to stay on Zapdos, for example. It's also the fighting. It also has the fighting stab, so it's much better into Tyranitar 1v1, especially as a lead. I feel like it's kind of like actually it's closer to Medicham. It's closer to Medicham than to Charizard. It's like a breed mix of Charizard and Medicham. And for this reason, it would probably rank around here or around here, I don't know. But yeah, I didn't rank it because I feel like I would just be talking out of my ass. And I always want my opinion to be backed up by actual experience, like by actual usage, you know. So Skarmory probably usable. I haven't seen one in a while. I don't like it personally. I think it's ass. But if you wanna use it, if you wanna see it being used, check Mana's games from Kalos Invitational. So Donphan has a defensive niche. I don't like it, but it's usable. Dragonite offensive niche definitely. Nothing new about them to talk about personally. So like D-Knight has L-Bell in the moveset, so you can see it on some team where it's gonna T-Wave an L-Bell, unlike and being more offensive than Blissey or Celebi as a cleric. Donphan has a niche, yeah, Anti-Espion, Executor, all these Pokemon have niches, but nothing that I feel like is worth talking about. Glalie, definitely a niche actually, like, I haven't used it or seen it myself enough, but it's a spiker that is more offensive, and that has taunt, unlike Forretress Skarmory. You actually also can stay on Zapdos, so that's a pretty big threat as a spiker. You have Boom too, like it's definitely not harmful. I would personally rank it like I don't know, somewhere here. Golduck actually has a pretty funny niche. It's honestly similar to Kingdra and Ludicolo because it's very good into offense. And thanks to Cloud9, it's not gonna die to Sand, so you want to use it with Selak and CM. And it's gonna clear some offense like, you know, Aerodactyl, T-Tar kind of stuff. Especially the no water resist one. But it's anchored and I don't use or see it enough. We've seen one Gorobis in CL. In CL, it's got the mix of like Rain Dance and Balance Pass. What else? Hypno can fit on some. So the thing is, I've talked about BP team before, but I feel like whenever I use Battle Pass teams, they're not all in on Battle Pass. Even if I use Ninjask like doesn't even waste turn to set up. It just protect once and you Battle Pass. Hypno is much more. It is usable on some Battle Pass team, but it's gonna be very Battle Pass centric to work. What else? Politoed, Thief, Hydro Pump, Hypnosis. Nice combo of moves. Sableye. So Sableye is definitely rankable if Metagross is. Because we've seen people use it, especially ABR. Fizz Def. It's good into Claydol. And it recovers, and like Metagross is desperate. It also has knockoff, which is a very strong move, obviously. I still don't really like it, like personally, if I wanna fish a matchup, I still rather use Misdreavus. Because I feel like Sableye is abused. Even offensive Claydol can just predict it, click Earthquake, and then you have a few windows to crit against Sableye. It's not awful though. And it's only offensive Claydol that really does that. It would probably be somewhere here. Because the niche is very well established, it switches into Claydol well and keeps the spikes. And then, like, it also beats Cursolax with Psych Up. Like, just PP waste it, PP wall it, and it's actually a big deal because Cursolax is typically very strong into those kind of archetypes. Sceptile is definitely usable. So, okay. Solrock 2. Yeah, Roselia as well, but nothing new to talk about, or that I use myself to rank. And I think I covered pretty much everything, honestly. And I'm probably gonna stop here so the video isn't too long. 1 hour and a half should be plenty enough for most of you. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I will also probably make a post on Smogon, because I really like to write instead of talk. I like to make forum posts. So I will probably summarize most of my thoughts into a forum post. Sometimes later today or in the week, or at least before the new VRs comes up. And that's pretty much it. Enjoy your day. Thanks for coming, the usual. Peace.